Hey there, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I did not sleep much the last night in the shop. I lay on the cushions in the office with Lily stretched across my chest, listening to every small sound inside the building and outside on the street. The old stove gave off a fading warmth that barely reached the corners of the room. The barricades stood where I had built them. The traps hung where I had left them. None of it made me feel settled anymore. The place had done its job. It kept me alive through winter. Now it felt too tight, too fixed, too easy for trouble to find. When the first grey light slipped through the upper edge of the window, I got up. Lily complained and dug her claws lightly into my shirt before I set her down on the cushions. I walked through the shop one more time, the car wash tunnel, the bays, the rows of tools. My patched improvements looked rough and clumsy in daylight. The wood I had nailed over windows, the shelves wedged against doors, the vent pipe from the stove running up through the old duct. All of it told a story that was over now. I had stayed long enough in this city. The sedan waited in the fenced lot behind the shop. The silver paint was dull from dust and weather. The body still had dried marks from the last owner's blood. The seats were worn but solid. Half a tank of fuel sat in the gauge. That number, if I converted it to miles in my head, gave me no comfort at all. I had no idea what roads would be blocked, where I would have to idle, how many times I would need to turn around. It was enough to leave. It was not enough to relax. I loaded the car in short, focused trips. Food first. Cans with labels I trusted. Dry goods that still tasted like something. No rotten jars. No bags with tears. Then water, the heaviest part. I hated leaving behind any of the filled containers, but I could not overload the trunk. The suspension already dipped more than I liked. Then the stove, the pot, knives, the wrench, some rope, blankets, tape. I packed it all in layers, heavier items low and near the center. I did not want everything flying around inside if I had to brake hard or hit something. For Lily, I prepared the passenger side. I secured her backpack with the belt, propped the base with a folded jacket so she would not slide. I left a small opening at the top so she could look out when she wanted. A small bowl of water sat in the footwell. I wanted to give her more, a softer pillow, a better carrier, anything. But I had reached the point where comfort had to lose to practicality. If we stayed, comfort would be ripped away by something worse. The last thing I did inside the shop was stand in the middle of the main bay and look around. I remembered the first time I broke in, how clumsy I felt, how lost. I remembered the first time I killed an infected in here. I remembered the crazed man I had to put down when he came at me with the knife. That memory never sat clean in my head. It still did not. Walking out now felt like admitting that everything I did here was only a pause, not a full answer. I closed the side door from the outside and slid the improvised metal bar through the handles one last time. It was more habit than security now. Anyone determined would get in with enough effort. The building could not protect itself anymore. I did not leave any written messages, no warnings, no instructions. Whoever found it next would decide for himself what to do with the place. I could not live that person's future for him. I started the sedan and listened carefully to the sound. The idle was rough at first, then leveled out into a steady vibration through the steering wheel. Lily shifted in the backpack and poked her head out, eyes wide. She sniffed the air, then relaxed and curled back down. The street in front of the shop stood empty. A light breeze pushed loose trash along the curb. No infected in sight. That meant nothing, but it gave me a clear path for the first 100 yards. Pulling away from the curb felt strange. The shop grew small in the rearview mirror faster than I was ready for. I kept glancing back until the building vanished behind a row of houses. That was it. Months of life, boiled down to a shrinking shape in a dirty mirror. I turned my attention forward and forced myself to treat the decision as final. If I went back, it would mean something had gone very wrong out here. I avoided the main downtown roads and took a route I had mapped in my head during long nights. Service streets, back lanes, old delivery routes behind big stores. The sedan rolled past burned-out trucks and cars that had not moved since the first days of panic. Some had doors hanging open, some had smashed glass, some had dark stains around them I refused to examine closely. I drove slowly. The fuel gauge loomed in the corner of my vision. Every small movement of the needle felt personal. The infected were out, but scattered. One lurched from behind a bus stop and turned toward the engine noise. I steered around it instead of accelerating. I did not want to waste fuel running over bodies unless I had no choice. Another stood motionless in the shadow of a pharmacy, head tilted slightly, as if caught halfway through an old habit. It did not react until I was already past. More reminders that decay had started to weaken some of them. That did not make them safe. It made them unpredictable. On the edge of the city, near the older industrial district, I slowed even more. I had no real reason to trust that the outskirts were safer. In many ways they were worse. Fewer people meant fewer dead. Fewer dead meant infected that had not been culled by chaos. The roads were cracked and covered with loose gravel. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the car creep over potholes. Any sharp piece of metal could tear a tire and strand me in a blind spot. Once I passed the last row of warehouses and small factories, the surroundings opened up. Weeds had grown high along the roadside barriers. Trees leaned in from both sides, reclaiming the shoulders. The sky looked wider out here. That should have felt freeing. It did not. It felt like standing in the center of an empty parking lot with no cover. If anything started running at me, there would be nowhere to hide the car. The first hours outside the city passed in a slow, careful crawl. My eyes moved from the road ahead to the mirrors to the sides, repeating the cycle every few seconds. Lily slept in bursts, waking when the car bumped, then settling again. Each time she stirred, I reached over and scratched the side of the backpack. That was as much reassurance for me as it was for her. If she was still calm, things were not completely falling apart yet. By midday, the fuel gauge had dipped lower than I expected. The miles I covered did not match the drop. Detours and slow speeds worked against efficiency, on top of whatever age and condition the sedan carried. Waiting for the gauge to hit the red zone before planning for fuel would be suicide. I needed to start now. I turned off onto a smaller pull-off where old highway patrol cars used to sit, tucked under a stand of trees. Several abandoned vehicles sat here now, forming a quiet graveyard. I parked at the entrance, left the engine off, and watched for movement. The only sounds came from birds and wind. No groans, no scraping, no loose stone shifting under feet. Leaving Lily alone made my stomach twist, but I did not want her underfoot while I checked each car. I locked the doors, showed her the water bowl, and spoke to her in a steady tone. She looked at me through the mesh, ears twitching, then curled back down. I stepped out, closed the door carefully, and carried my small length of hose and 2 empty bottles I had saved from earlier supply runs. This would be my first real attempt at siphoning fuel on the road. The first car I tried had a fuel cap so corroded I could hardly twist it. I forced it loose, slipped the hose in, and lowered the other end into the first bottle. I crouched there, feeling stupid, and very aware of how exposed my back was. I remembered the basic instructions. Create suction, pull the fuel into the hose, let it flow down into the bottle. Simple in theory. In practice, it meant putting my mouth on a dirty tube and hoping I did not poison myself. I sucked on the hose, tasted plastic and air. Then suddenly harsh fumes hit my tongue and the back of my throat. I yanked the hose away and spit, gagging on the bitterness. The first reaction was to cough and curse until my chest hurt. I leaned on my knees, eyes watering, and spat again and again until the taste faded a little. My head felt light and agitated. The bottle had only a little fuel in it. It barely reached the bottom. I forced myself to keep going. Another pull on the hose. Another rush of fumes, more spitting. Each attempt left me more drained. When I finally got a steady flow into the bottle, my mouth felt raw. I watched the liquid rise in the plastic, clear and yellowish. At least it did not look like sludge. I stopped before the bottle overflowed and moved the hose to the second one. Every small noise in the trees made my shoulders tighten. I kept having to pause and look around, certain something was standing just behind me. Nothing showed. By the time both bottles were full, my patience and throat were done. I poured them carefully into the sedan's tank and did the math in my head. The gain would not carry me far, enough to cover maybe another day with careful driving. The quality of the fuel worried me. I had no way to test octane or age. I could only go by color and smell. It would have to do. Standing out here longer would not magically generate better options. Back in the driver's seat, I drank clean water and let the burning taste fade. Lily climbed out of the backpack and onto my lap for a moment, sniffing my face, then turned away in disgust. I could not blame her. I put her back gently, started the engine, and rolled back onto the road. Lesson learned. I needed a better way to drain fuel if I wanted to survive longer than a week in this car. The next day answered that problem, though not in a kind way. By then, I had moved off the main state route and onto a smaller highway that cut through a mix of light woods and old commercial strips. Empty billboards leaned over the road. The sun shone a bit stronger. The air had the slightly sour smell of warming asphalt and old trash. I spotted the lonely gas station from a distance. The sign out front had missing letters. The pump stood quiet. No power, no life. A glass-fronted shop sat behind them, its door hanging crooked. The windows were broken in a few places. The parking area was half empty, just a few cars at odd angles, some with doors still open. It looked hit but not fully stripped. That meant either it had been cleaned out early and forgotten, or someone had run out of energy before taking every last thing. I circled the lot slowly with the sedan, watching for movement inside the shop and between the cars. No infected in sight. The only sound was the wind brushing against old flags tied to the pump awnings. I parked beside the station building where I could see most of the lot, then shut off the engine and sat still for a full minute, listening. Nothing. Lily peered out through the mesh, nose twitching. I cracked the door, stepped out, and closed it without a slam. The station smelled of dust and stale fuel. Inside the shop, the shelves lay mostly empty. A few crushed snack bags, a broken coffee machine, faded lottery posters. The refrigerators stood open and rotting. No reason to stay. The real potential sat in the back. Behind the station, there was a small concrete shed with a metal door left ajar. I eased it open and found what I needed more than anything: tools, hoses, and several manual pumps. One of them was a simple hand siphon with a squeeze bulb in the center of a clear hose, the kind used to empty tanks or barrels. A plastic crate nearby held a stack of fuel-safe canisters, most of them intact. I took a pump and one canister to a car near the side of the lot and set up the line, hose in the tank, bulb in hand, canister on the ground. I squeezed the bulb several times. Fuel started to move along the clear tube, flowing steadily into the container with almost no effort. No contact with my mouth, no fumes in my face. It felt like cheating, but in a world that had taken so much, I was willing to accept one piece of luck that did not demand immediate blood in return. I filled 2 canisters and poured both into the sedan. Then I filled one more to store in the trunk, making sure the lid was tight. I paid attention to the labels on the cars too. One truck clearly marked diesel in large letters. I stayed away from those. I wanted to be sure I never mixed up fuels and broke the last working engine I had. One mistake like that and the rest of my careful planning would turn into useless memory. I did one last sweep through the station before leaving and found nothing else worth dragging along. No hidden food, no medicine, no map with secret notes, just the pump and canisters. That was enough. Back in the car, the fuel gauge now sat closer to full than empty. The sight calmed a part of my mind. Distance had become my main currency. Each extra line on that gauge meant more choices on where to aim the sedan. I drove for several more hours without anything unusual. That should have relaxed me. Instead, I stayed tense, waiting for the next bad piece of luck. It came near dusk on a stretch that looked deceptively safe. A gentle turn, low hills, and a few old warehouses off in the distance. No big wrecks on the road, no obvious danger. I even let myself press the pedal a little harder, just for a short burst to feel the car respond. That was my mistake. The herd appeared near the end of the curve, where the land dropped slightly and the road cut through a shallow dip. A mass of infected drifted across the lanes from left to right, filling the space between the guardrails. Dozens, maybe more. Some walked, some stumbled, some crawled. A few moved faster on fresher legs. I saw them too late to stop safely. Slamming the brakes from that speed on a cracked road would have sent the sedan into a slide. Turning around with that many bodies ahead, and who knew how many behind, would have trapped me in a sandwich. There was no good option, only degrees of bad. I made a choice that would stay with me for a long time. I tightened my grip on the wheel and drove into the gap between the densest clusters, pressing the pedal hard enough to keep momentum without losing control. The car struck bodies. It jolted. Something rolled along the side. One infected hit the hood and slid over the windshield, smearing it in a way that blocked most of my view. I kept the wheel straight and prayed the asphalt stayed level. A hand reached in from the right as one infected managed to get closer than the others, slamming into the side of the car and punching through the rear side window. Glass burst inward. Lily shrieked from the sudden impact and buried herself deeper in her carrier, pushing herself under the blanket. The herd thinned as the sedan blasted through. In the rearview mirror, I saw bodies tumbling to the pavement, some trying and failing to crawl. I did not slow until the road ahead stretched empty for several hundred yards. Then I pulled off onto the shoulder and stopped. My hands stayed on the wheel longer than they needed to. Stepping out felt harder than it should have. The rear side window was gone, just jagged glass around the frame. The cardboard I had packed in the trunk for general use came in handy now. I taped it over the opening from the inside, layering it thick enough to block most of the wind. The car now looked patched and damaged. It still ran though. That mattered more than looks. No cuts on the seat, no fresh blood inside, just some glass fragments, which I swept into a plastic bag. Lily crept out from under her blanket and inspected the new panel with suspicious eyes. That night, I camped at a small turnout off the road, half hidden behind a stand of shrubs. I did not light a fire. I ate a cold meal, gave Lily her food, and tried to rest in the driver's seat with the seat folded back. Sleep came in short bursts. Every time the car creaked as it cooled, I opened my eyes, expecting to see a face at the window. None appeared. The herd had moved on in its own aimless direction. The next day, I found the police car. It sat wedged against a low concrete barrier near an old exit ramp. The front end was crumpled, the windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The light bar lay half broken on the asphalt. No officers to be seen, no flares, no tape. Just a car left in place when whoever drove it decided running or hiding offered better odds. I parked a safe distance behind it, engine off, and watched the surroundings for a full minute. A few infected wandered far down the ramp near a cluster of abandoned vehicles. None turned this way. I walked up to the cruiser and tried the doors. The driver's side opened with a groan. Inside, the air smelled of old fabric, dust, and a sharp trace of something metallic that made me think of old blood even before I spotted the dark spots on the floor mat. No body, just stains. The dash held nothing useful. The radio had been ripped out. The computer mount was empty. The glove compartment contained only dried-out registration slips. I checked under the front seats next, feeling around by hand. My fingers brushed leather and hard plastic. A belt. I pulled it out and found the holster still attached. Inside the holster sat a handgun, standard issue, with a loaded magazine. The sight of it made my chest tighten. It represented safety, danger, and noise all at once. I ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, then reinserted it. The motion felt rusty in my hands. I owned a handgun before the outbreak and had spent time at a range now and then, but months had passed since I last fired anything louder than a stove. My grip felt clumsy. My muscle memory hovered somewhere under the layer of survival routines the auto shop had forced on me. Alongside the gun, I found 2 more magazines in a pouch, both loaded. No magic bottomless ammo, but enough to matter in the right moment. I took the belt and the magazines and stowed them under the driver's seat of the sedan. There was no point pretending I would use the handgun only for infected. I had already killed one man in my shop when he came at me half insane. The road was full of strangers whose intentions I could not read from a distance. The gun added weight to my choices. That was not pleasant. It was still better than facing every threat with a wrench and a prayer. Later that same day, I got my first reminder that the living were just as risky as the dead. It happened near a small cluster of houses that backed onto the highway. 2 cars parked nose to nose across a side road, forming a crude barrier. 3 men stood near them, talking. One saw the sedan approaching and stepped into the lane, raising a hand in a friendly wave. That move set off an alarm in my head. I slowed, but did not roll the window all the way down. I kept the car in drive, foot on the brake. The man walked closer, smiling too much for the situation. His clothes looked cleaner than mine. His eyes kept flicking past my face to the interior of the car, scanning for supplies. Another man drifted casually toward the rear of the sedan, hands in his pockets. The third stayed behind the bumper wall, leaning on it in a relaxed posture that did not match the rest of the scene at all. "Rough road ahead?" the front man asked, tone light, as if this was a normal highway stop. His gaze flicked to the backpack where Lily hid, and then to the trunk. He asked if I had seen a convoy of trucks earlier in the day. That felt like a test more than curiosity. I lied by reflex. I told him no, I had not seen anyone in a long while, and that I was low on fuel and just looking for a place to rest. I kept my answers short, voice flat. As we spoke, the second man moved closer to the rear quarter, near the broken cardboard window. The third man shifted just enough to make me think he would circle around if given a chance. When the front man suggested I pull over for a second and step out so we can talk properly, the last bits of doubt fell away. That was not a friendly offer. That was a setup. I pretended to reach down for the gear shift to put the car in park, but instead I pressed the accelerator gently and turned the wheel toward the small gap beside the barrier. The sedan lurched forward. The man at the front shouted and jumped aside, slapping his hand on the hood. The second man grabbed the edge of the cardboard and tore part of it away as I passed. The third man behind the nose-to-nose cars lifted something metal, maybe a crowbar, and swung at the rear window. Glass cracked but did not fully shatter. I heard a loud bang a second later as a shot went off, and the passenger side mirror exploded into fragments. I did not look back. The car bounced over the curb at the edge of the road, scraped along a light pole, and then burst onto the highway again. I drove for a full mile before easing off the gas. My fingers ached from gripping the wheel too hard. Lily had pressed herself deep into the backpack, silent. I could not shake the thought that if I had hesitated even a little, those men would have dragged me out, stripped the car, and left us with nothing. That encounter cemented a rule I already knew instinctively. Strangers on the road were as dangerous as any herd, maybe more. Days started to blur into each other after that. I measured them by fuel stops, meal breaks, short naps, and moments of tension. I learned how to spot cars that still held usable fuel, ones that looked abandoned in a rush rather than stripped for parts, ones in shade where the heat had not baked everything dry. I learned to check the smell and color of what I pumped. Cloudy, dark fuel stayed in the donor tank. Clear and yellow went into my canisters. I also noticed a shift in how I treated the infected. Early on, every encounter felt like life or death. I gave wide gaps, backed away, spent a long time planning each approach. On the road, that mindset faded, because there was no time for that level of caution outside of special situations. An infected near a gas donor car got handled quickly. I approached with a knife or the wrench, kept my distance as long as I could, then struck hard when an opening appeared. No speeches in my head, no drawn-out thoughts, just action. They were still dangerous. If one grabbed my arm, that could be the end of everything. I did not forget that. I started looking at them more like storm debris than monsters. Obstacles that moved, bit, and clawed. They did not think about what they were doing. People did. That made the people harder to face. The worst human moment came around the end of the first week on the road. The day had been quiet until then. I was on a long straight stretch with fields on both sides and a tree line far off in the distance. No houses, no buildings, no real cover. Ahead, I saw dust rising from the edge of the road. My first thought was an old tractor or some animal movement. As I got closer, I saw motorcycles and a minivan. I slowed instinctively and dropped back, letting distance build until I could watch without being noticed. 2 bikes stood parked, engines idling. A third lay on its side. A minivan sat at an angle near the ditch, front tire flat. 2 figures in patched leather jackets stood near the open side door. Another stood by the front of the van, holding a shotgun. On the ground, a man in dirty clothes lay on his back, arms raised. Beside the van, a woman and a teenage boy huddled near the rear wheel. The scene did not need sound to tell the story. I could have reversed right there, shifted into gear, spun the car around, and driven away. No one had seen me yet. The logical part of my mind explained that these strangers were not my responsibility, that stepping into this mess with 1 small sedan and a cat was reckless. It listed all the ways this could go wrong: cracked radiator, shot tires, broken glass, a dead driver, Lily stuck alone in a disabled vehicle. Then I thought of the man I killed in the shop. I had not chosen that encounter. It forced itself on me. This time, I actually had the ability to intersect the path of what was happening ahead. Turning away would mean accepting that the outcome stayed the same. It would mean letting those bikers finish whatever they were doing while I rolled past, safe and untouched. The idea sat badly in my chest. I knew I would have to live with that memory if I drove on. I did not know if I could sit alone by a camp stove later and pretend this road did not exist. I pulled the sedan off the main road and down a slight slope into the ditch, using tall grass to hide part of the car. Then I turned off the engine and listened. Lily shifted in the backpack and stared at me through the mesh, ears perked. I put a hand on the bag and told her quietly that we were going to do something stupid but necessary. My own voice sounded dry. I climbed back into the driver's seat, keeping low, then started the engine again and inched the sedan forward in the ditch. The ground was uneven but passable. My plan, if it could be called that, was basic. Approach from behind and to the side, use the car's weight and speed, and hope the bikers were too focused on their victims to react in time. I aimed the sedan up the slight slope and waited until the angle felt right. When I pressed the accelerator and the car shot up onto the road, everything became a series of quick snapshots. One biker turned his head, face changing from boredom to surprise. The man on the ground tried to roll aside. The shotgun wielder started to lift the weapon but had no time to aim. I kept the wheel straight and did not let myself slow down. The sedan hit 2 of the bikers. The impact jolted the frame. One body rolled across the hood and slammed into the windshield, cracking it further, then slid away. A bike flew into the ditch. I did not stop right away. I braked only when the road ahead cleared, and the rear-view mirror showed no immediate movement. Then I put the car in reverse and backed up slowly, keeping a short distance from the wrecked bikes. The man with the shotgun lay still. The other 2 bikers did not move either. The man from the ground tried to sit up, clutching his ribs. The woman was screaming, the teenager clinging to her side. I got out with the handgun in my right hand and the wrench in my left, trying to present as much threat as I could in case some part of the biker mess still had life in it. The family's eyes locked on the gun first. I told them to stay near the van. My voice shook and cracked. I walked over to the closest biker and nudged his boot with the wrench. No response. The chest did not rise. The neck bent at an angle that left no doubt. I moved to the others. All dead or close enough. I backed away, unwilling to search their bodies in front of the family just yet. The man from the ground tried to stand and failed. Up close, his injuries were clear. One leg bent wrong from the knee down. His breathing came shallow and strained. A dark stain spread across his shirt from a wound at his side. The woman cried his name again and again. The teenager knelt beside him, pressing his hands over the bleeding. I tried to help in the only way I knew. I grabbed my small medical kit from the car, tore open gauze, pressed it over the worst of the bleeding, and asked if he could feel his toes. His answers came in half-formed sentences. He seemed to understand that his body had taken more damage than it could handle. His grip on my wrist was weak but desperate. He tried to ask about where we were headed, about whether I was going somewhere safe. I told him I was just passing through, that I did not have a plan beyond staying ahead of trouble. That truth looked like a disappointment in his eyes. He did not last long. The blood loss and the broken leg worked together in a way that shut him down piece by piece. The woman's voice shifted from demanding help to pleading, then to quiet, desperate whispers. The teenager kept pressing his hands against the wound until the man stopped responding. I did not need to check a pulse to know the result. Silence said enough. I stepped back and watched the road for infected. The gunshots from the shotgun and the noise of the impact would travel. Sure enough, within a few minutes, infected appeared in the distance. A small group this time, staggering along the shoulder, drawn toward the commotion. We did not have long. I told the woman and the teenager that more were coming. I said we needed to move. They did not argue. Grief sat on them as a kind of weight, but survival instinct still flickered. I could not take them with me long term. The sedan barely had room for my supplies and Lily. Adding 2 more bodies would mean removing most of my food and water. That would just create 3 dead people instead of 1. So I did the only thing that felt workable. I drove the van as far as it would go on the ruined tire, off onto a nearby farm road where a small cluster of houses stood. The teenager followed in the sedan beside me so the mother could stay with her husband's body for the short move. Once we parked near the houses, I helped them carry what supplies they had into the nearest structure, with intact doors and windows. I gave them one of my extra knives, a blanket, some food, and a simple explanation of what to watch for. We did not do long goodbyes. They were half numb and half in shock. I had nothing wise to say. I checked the mother and the teenager for bites or scratches. They were clean. I made sure both knew to check each other regularly. Then I left them with the keys to the van, in case they figured out a way to patch the tire or find a replacement. Driving away from that farmhouse felt heavy in a different way than leaving the auto shop. I had intervened, killed 3 people, and the person I was trying to save still died. I saved 2 others, at least for now, but the cost hung over the road behind me like a shadow I could not outrun. I did not get any sudden sense of being a hero. I just felt tired and older. It confirmed something I already sensed. The road would keep asking me to decide who lives and who dies, and neither answer would ever feel clean. The next day, I focused on small practical things. Anything to keep my mind busy. The windshield cracks from the biker impact had spread. Visibility was still acceptable, but only for so long. I cleaned the glass carefully to remove small loose pieces, then reinforced part of the crack with clear tape. It would not stop further damage, but it might slow it down. I stopped at a strip mall near a smaller town and went into a clothing store that still had some items on the racks. I swapped out my worn-out shirt for a sturdier flannel, found jeans that were not ripped in the knees, and picked up a jacket more suited to changing weather. On a rack near the back, I found a line of hats. Most were novelty junk. One was a simple wide-brimmed cowboy hat that actually felt useful for blocking sun while I drove. I put it on, checked the mirror, and felt a small, strange sense of distance from the man I had been months ago. I grabbed a pair of sunglasses from a display at the front. They were not expensive when the world still ran on money. Now they were priceless. The glare off the hood and the broken glass on the road had been wearing on my eyes. With the glasses on and the hat brim low, I felt more ready to face long stretches of open sunlight. Not stronger, just less exposed. I kept moving. The car and I settled into a rhythm. Drive, scan, stop, siphon, eat, rest, move again. Every night, I found a place where I could pull off the main routes and park under some kind of cover. Behind half-fallen billboards, under overpasses, in small clearings near tree lines, where I could still see the road but not be visible from every angle. I stayed in the driver's seat most nights, sleeping in broken shifts. Lily curled either in my lap or the passenger seat. Her presence remained the one quiet thread that kept the days from turning into a grey mass of tasks. After a while, the road started to press on my head. The constant noise of the engine, the scanning for threats, the worry about fuel and tires, the tension every time I saw dust in the distance. I caught myself gripping the wheel too hard even on empty stretches. I noticed that I only saw trees as cover and fields as open danger. I did not see anything as a place to exist, just lanes to cross and avoid. One afternoon, after a long run between two small towns that were nothing but collapsed roofs and empty streets, I realized I needed a break from all of it. Not a permanent stop, just a reset somewhere that did not smell like hot asphalt and old exhaust. So I started watching, not just for wrecks and infected, but for a place that might give me a different kind of shelter, somewhere away from big roads, somewhere with water. I remembered my mother talking years ago about how streams and tree lines can tell you more about land than any map. At the time, it felt like background noise behind my screen. Now those fragments were all I had. A couple of days later, I found it. I was following a narrow county road that twisted through low hills. Trees grew thicker here, more alive than the bare patches near the city. On the right, the land dropped gently into a valley. Through breaks in the trunks, I saw sunlight hitting something that reflected, not sharply, but in a dull, continuous band. Water, some kind of river or wide stream. The air smelled cleaner with the windows cracked, more leafy, less rotten. I slowed until the tires barely made noise and scanned for a side path. After a few bends, a dirt track appeared, cutting off the paved road toward the valley. The entrance looked overgrown but not blocked. No gate, no fresh tire marks, no obvious sign of recent human use. I stopped the sedan in the center of the lane, checked mirrors, and listened. No engines, no voices, no infected, just insects and a distant rush that might have been water moving over rocks. I turned down the dirt track. The suspension complained a bit, but the car held. Branches brushed the sides. After about 5 minutes of slow rolling, the trees opened around a small clearing. The ground there was relatively flat, with a gentle slope toward the river. I could see part of the valley below, a strip of water winding between stones and low bushes. The view gave me a sense of space I had not felt in months. No buildings, no cars, no rows of windows watching me from the dark. I parked near the edge of the clearing, facing the way I came. Always leave the nose pointed toward the exit. That rule had become automatic. I shut off the engine and listened. Birds called in the canopy. Water rolled steadily in the distance. A breeze moved through the grass and leaves. No dragging steps. No wet moans. No smell of rot. For the first time since I left the shop, I felt something close to rest step into my head. My camping gear was almost non-existent. I had a small stove, a pot, blankets, a few plastic sheets from an old hardware store, and the clothes on my back. That was it. No proper tent, no sleeping bag, no fancy tools. If I wanted this clearing to serve as a small breakpoint, I had to use what was here. Trees, branches, ground, water. The sedan would still be my best shelter, but I could at least make the area less naked. First, I checked the perimeter. I walked the edge of the clearing in a slow circle, looking for tracks, deer prints, small padded marks that might be foxes or coyotes. No clear boot prints. That mattered more than anything. The ground near the stream had more traffic. Hooves, small claws. Once in a while, something larger and deeper pressed into moist earth. Bears existed in this region. I had not really considered that while glued to servers and screens. But the signs were here. I logged the thought and did not push it away. I brought Lily out next, on a rope leash I had rigged from paracord. At first she fought it, pulling hard and trying to dart under the car. The open air and scent of plants overwhelmed her. I crouched, held the rope steady, and let her sniff slowly at the grass. Her ears flicked in every direction at once. She moved with low, unsure steps. After a while, she started testing the edge of the leash's reach without panicking. That was enough for day one. The shelter came next. I did not plan to build a cabin or anything serious. I did not have the skills, tools, or time. I just wanted something that broke lines of sight and would tangle up any animal or infected that came at me directly. I gathered branches from the tree line, focusing on long, straight ones as thick as my wrist. I cut them down to rough stakes with the hunting knife, sharpening one end as best I could. Around the place where I decided to cook and sit, I drove those stakes into the ground in a loose ring, leaving gaps I could step through but spacing them tight enough that a running body would catch a shin or thigh before hitting the car. It was not a real wall, it was annoyance and delay. Sometimes that was all a person needed to stay alive. In front of the sedan, I used some of the larger branches to rig a sort of lean-to with the plastic sheets tied between two trees, slanting down toward the ground. That gave me a dry spot to sit and cook if it rained. I still slept in the car. I did not try to pretend that any pile of branches was safer than a locked metal shell. At night, I pushed the driver's seat back, wrapped a blanket around myself, and kept the handgun under my jacket. The windows stayed cracked a finger's width to avoid fogging everything up and to let me hear the outside sounds, but not enough for anything to reach in. Water came from the stream. I followed a small deer trail down to the bank and crouched there, listening to the flow. The water looked clear, moving over small stones. I knew it could still carry all kinds of things that would ruin my body in ways no infected ever could. So I treated it. I used the filter I had taken from a camping store months ago and boiled what I planned to drink. The pot sat over the stove on flat ground, steam rolling off it in a steady cloud. I caught myself watching it longer than necessary, hypnotized by the simple fact that I was heating clean water in the open air with no walls around me. While exploring the banks, I found clusters of bushes bearing small red berries that resembled raspberries, and darker ones shaped like blueberries. I did not just throw them into my mouth. I tested them slowly, a berry or two, then wait several hours. No cramps, no strange taste, no dizziness. Gradually, I added more. Over a couple of days, I decided these particular bushes were safe in small amounts. They gave variety to the canned food and stale crackers. The herbs came from low plants with small green leaves that smelled faintly like mint when crushed. I picked a few, dried them near the stove, and steeped them in boiling water. The result tasted rough but better than plain hot water. It reminded me of all the tea my mother brewed while she talked about weather and patience and small everyday things. I caught myself lifting the mug toward no one and felt stupid, but the action made the camp feel less temporary in my head. Being near the stream and berries did not solve the larger problem though. I still had limited food, and I had to think past the next few days. I wanted real meat again, not just squirrel scraps from traps and the occasional bird. I started to think about larger game. Deer maybe. Something with enough meat that I could eat until I was full for once. It was not just hunger, it was curiosity. Could I actually do it as the person I had become? Or was that only something I had watched people do on a screen? I decided to try. Not with a rifle and stand and all the proper gear. I had none of that. I had a shovel, a knife, and the ability to dig. So I chose a spot off one of the animal paths near the stream, where I had seen hoofprints more than once. I marked it in my mind and came back with tools. Then I started digging. The pit took most of the day. I hacked through roots, scooped aside stones, and tried to make the hole deep enough that an animal larger than me could not just walk out once it fell in. My hands blistered. Dirt got into my sleeves and down my back. There were moments where I almost stopped, telling myself this was a waste of energy, that I should just keep eating canned food and be thankful. But the thought of an actual roast, even a rough one, kept me going. When the pit was deep enough, I lined the bottom with sharpened stakes, driving each one into the soil firmly, not so tight that an animal would just pass over them like a floor, and not so loose that they would topple at the first touch. The idea was simple. The animal breaks through the cover, falls, and gets caught in the stakes, injured enough to be finished off quickly. It sounded brutal even in my own thoughts, but there was no gentle way to bring down a deer with no firearm. I covered the pit with thin branches, then layered leaves and loose soil over the top, feathering the edges into the surrounding ground. I tried to match the step pattern of the path so nothing looked too disturbed. I had no bait beyond the path itself. Animals had been using it for weeks before I arrived. That habit might be enough. Then there was Lily. Keeping her locked in the car while I worked did not feel right anymore. The world outside the sedan was dangerous, but it was also the only world left. If I kept her sealed away in bags and carriers forever, she would be helpless if anything happened to me. That thought bothered me more than the idea of her getting scratched by a branch. So I started a kind of training. At first I kept her on the leash near the camp, tying the rope to a stake and giving her enough range to walk, climb low branches, and sniff the ground. She fought it hard at the start, trying to slip the collar and dart off. Once or twice she wriggled free and sprinted toward the trees. Each time my stomach dropped and I called her name, ready to run barefoot after her. But she stopped after a short distance, looked back, and came slowly toward the sound of my voice. That gave me hope. After a few days, I loosened control further. I let her off the leash near the edge of the clearing with the understanding in my own head that if she disappeared, that would be her choice and something beyond my reach. She ran in a wide circle at first, tail high, then melted into the grass and undergrowth with a grace I would never have. She did not return for what felt like a long time. I fought the urge to call constantly. I forced myself to work on firewood piles and watch the trees quietly. She came back near dusk with something small in her mouth. A rodent, limp and clearly dead. She dropped it near the car and sat down, licking her paws with exaggerated care. I crouched beside her and scratched her head. I did not scream, did not scold. She was adapting. She was doing what a cat should do to survive out here. From that day on, she split her time between lounging near the car and disappearing into the brush to hunt. Once in a while, I saw her freeze and track birds in the branches with that intense stare only cats have. Life in the clearing settled into its own slow cycle. Morning walks to check the trap. Water runs from the stream. Small repairs to the lean-to when wind pulled at the plastic. Fuel management for the stove and the car. I ran the engine now and then to keep the battery from dying outright and to remind myself I could still leave. The infected did not appear. Not once in the first week. No tracks. No distant groans. No bodies drifting through the trees. It was easy to start thinking this valley existed outside of what had happened to the rest of the world. The trap stayed empty at first. Each morning, I approached it with a mix of dread and hope, and found the cover untouched. The leaves settled in almost the same pattern as before. The path showed fresh hoofprints that skirted the pit by inches. I cursed quietly at the thought of a deer walking right alongside the trap and missing it. I adjusted the cover a bit, trying to guess where the animal's feet actually landed. Hunting from behind a keyboard had always seemed simple. Out here, the margin between success and failure came down to inches. On the 5th or 6th day, something changed. I approached the trap and saw the cover caved in. The edges had collapsed inward, and fresh marks scored the soil around the pit. My pulse jumped. I moved in slowly, knife in hand, and peered over the edge. Inside, a medium-sized deer lay skewered on 2 of the stakes, one through a hind leg, one into the side, not deep enough to kill on impact, but enough to pin it. Its head moved weakly. Breathing came in fast spasms. Blood streaked the dirt. The situation was brutal to watch. Leaving it in that state was not an option. It would mean a long, painful end that attracted everything from flies to bigger predators. I clenched my jaw, climbed down carefully using the uncovered corner, and finished it with a single hard stab where neck met skull, a place I had seen bow hunters aim in videos. It took longer than those clean clips implied. When it was over, I leaned against the dirt wall for a moment, not from some poetic emotion, but from the weight of understanding that I had chosen this outcome. I had built the pit, I had sharpened the stakes, I had acted. Then practical problems lined up fast. How to get the deer out, how to process it, how much meat I could actually use before it spoiled. I had no salt, no proper hooks, no smoker. The air temperature in this valley dropped at night but rose enough during the day to rot any carelessly handled carcass. I forced myself into motion before the sun climbed higher. I cut the deer free of the stakes and used a branch as a crude lever under its shoulders to push and drag it toward the nearest wall. Then I scrambled out and pulled from above. The muscles in my back screamed. Sweat ran into my eyes. Eventually the body slid over the lip and onto stable ground. From there, I dragged it in short bursts toward the clearing. It left a clear trail in the dirt and grass, one that broadcast to every animal in range that food was here. I worked next to the car, using its bulk as a kind of shield. With the knife, I did my best to follow the steps I remembered from diagrams and basic guides. Skin first, then large muscle groups, then smaller cuts. The work was messy in a way no video had ever captured. I ended up with more scraps than clean pieces, but enough usable meat to pile on a piece of plastic. I cut a few strips thin and set them over a simple rack above a small smoky fire to dry. The rest I cooked in batches, eating more than I would normally allow myself, and packing some into containers for the next day. The smell brought in the first real visit from the wider wild. As the light faded that evening, I heard movement at the edge of the trees that did not sound like deer. Heavier, slower, with pauses that suggested caution instead of mindless walking. I did not wait to see shapes. I put out the fire, sealed the remaining cooked meat in the tightest containers I had, and retreated into the sedan with Lily. She had already picked up on the shift in the air, ears flat, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the stakes. Nothing came into the camp that night, but I did not sleep much. Every twig snap outside made me sit up and listen. The next morning, I walked the perimeter and found deep tracks near one of the trees. Bigger than a deer, claw marks near a half-torn log. Bears again in my thoughts, no longer just prints near the stream. I cleaned the area carefully, removed any remaining bones, and carried them far away from the clearing. It felt like shouting into the forest that the feast was over. Go look somewhere else. I had no idea if that was how animal minds worked. I did it anyway. The real warning came a few days later. The infected still did not show. 2 full weeks had passed without any sign of them in this valley. During that time, I started to relax in a way that was not smart. My guard with wildlife stayed up, but some part of my mind kept repeating that at least the human disease was not here. That thin comfort took a hit when I climbed a rocky outcrop above the stream one late afternoon to get a better view of the valley. From that vantage point, I saw movement on the far side of the water, near a line of dense brush. At first, I thought it was just deer moving in a group. Then I heard growls, sharp and layered. A dark shape lunged from the cover, a bear, large, thick-bodied, fur-matted but healthy enough. Around it, 3 wolves darted in and out, testing, snapping at its hindquarters and flanks. The bear had something under it, maybe a carcass, maybe a cache of food. It stood its ground. One wolf got too close and took a heavy swipe that sent it tumbling. It got back up limping. The others backed off and circled. I watched that standoff for a long time, frozen on the rock, holding my breath without realizing it. The sound carried clearly enough in the valley. This was not a gentle forest where everything kept its distance. This place ran on the same rules as the roads, just with different weapons. I imagined that bear, or those wolves catching a scent trail leading straight to my car, and the little ring of stakes I had put up. I pictured being alone on the ground with only a knife and a handgun that was meant for 2-legged threats, not several 100 pounds of muscle and teeth. That was the moment my mind snapped back into the mode that had kept me alive so far. The valley had been kind. No infected for weeks. Plenty of water. Enough small food. One big successful hunt. It would not stay kind forever. I had no proper gun for large animals. No secure cabin with a thick door to retreat behind. No high platform. Just one car, a few sticks, and whatever courage I claimed to have. Staying longer would not turn me into some expert woodsman. It would only give the forest more time to notice me. I climbed down from the rock carefully and walked back to the clearing with a decision already formed. It was time to move on. I did not feel ready. I never would. I told myself out loud that the valley had given me what I needed. A break from the road, proof that I could live off something more than cans, and a clear reminder that I was still at the bottom of the food chain when it came to real wilderness. Breaking camp took less time than setting it up. That fact hit me hard. The stakes came out of the ground with a few kicks and tugs. The plastic lean-to folded into a ragged bundle. The stove, pot, and remaining fuel went back into their usual spots in the trunk. I filled every container I had with treated stream water, knowing I might not find a source as clean for a while. The deer trap I dismantled. I pulled the stakes and filled the pit as best I could, stamping the soil flat and covering it with leaves. Leaving a half-hidden hole in the ground felt wrong. Someone or something else would find it eventually. Better not to leave traps behind me. Lily acted strangely that morning. When I called her name to bring her back from the brush, she did not appear right away. For the first time since I let her roam free, I felt a flicker of panic that she had simply chosen the forest over the car. I walked the edge of the trees, calling softly, then more sharply. After a long full minute, she emerged from behind a fallen log, with her tail twitching, a small feather stuck to her whiskers. She trotted to the car and jumped through the open door as if nothing had changed. I let out a breath I had not noticed holding, and closed the door gently behind her. One last look at the clearing, and the valley sealed my memory of the place. I took in the pattern of the trees, the glint of the stream, the rocks where I had seen the bear and wolves earlier. No infected, no human structures, no signs that anyone besides me and the animals had been here in a long time. It would have been easy to pretend that the world outside this valley still had order. That fantasy had nearly convinced me to stay. I turned away before it could get a better grip. The sedan started on the first turn. The engine sounded a bit rough from disuse, but it settled quickly. I eased it back up the dirt track, branches scraping the sides again, and joined the county road at a slow roll. The forest swallowed the clearing behind me within seconds. Out on the paved lane, the rhythm of the road returned. Drive, scan, plan. Only this time, my eyes looked not just for cover and fuel, but for structures that might offer the kind of height and solid metal the woods could not. The next couple of days were a mix of small towns and industrial ruins. I passed a warehouse district with collapsed roofs, a single grocery store that had burned down completely, and a school with boards across the main entrance and broken glass on the upper floors. Infected appeared here and there in ones and twos, wandering near intersections or leaning against poles. No herds, no organized groups, just leftovers. I avoided them when I could and dealt with them quietly when I could not. The handgun stayed under the seat most of the time. Gunfire near buildings still felt like asking for trouble. Fuel stayed under control thanks to the siphon pump and the canisters I had salvaged. I got faster at recognizing which cars were worth the effort. Ones on the side of the road with doors still closed, and no obvious damage often held some fuel. Ones stripped of wheels and windows were usually bone dry. I also started paying attention to the kind of area I was in. Near big highway exits, most tanks had been drained months ago by people like me. On smaller county roads, cars abandoned after the first wave still had enough to matter. By the fourth day after leaving the valley, the land changed again. The hills lowered and spread out. Long, straight lines cut through the landscape in ways that did not match roads. At first I thought they were dried irrigation channels or strange clearings. Then, I saw steel rails glinting in the sun. A rail line ran roughly parallel to the road, sometimes close, sometimes drifting away behind ridges. Rail lines meant something: infrastructure, depots, repair points. In a world where roads were clogged with wrecks and blocked by destroyed bridges, rails sometimes kept going longer. Trains could not turn around and detour on a whim. If a line got cut, everything stopped there. Whatever traffic had used this line had clearly stopped long ago. Rust showed on some of the rails. Grass grew between ties, but the presence of steel meant there might be a major hub wherever these lines converged. Near late afternoon, I saw exactly that. The road curved around a shallow rise. When I reached the top, the view opened over a broad flat area dotted with buildings, towers, and long rows of stationary train cars. Several rail lines merged there, feeding into multiple side tracks that fanned out around a central complex. I recognized the layout from photos I had seen once in an article about logistics, a rail repair hub, or yard. From a distance, it looked dead. No smoke, No moving figures, no lights. The trains sat still, some with doors open, some closed. Boxcars, tankers, flatbeds, with long beams still strapped down. The buildings around them were a mix of low workshops and taller structures, with big garage doors for engines. Near the center stood a couple of cranes and a small tower that might have been an office or control room. The place was big enough to hold a small town's worth of people back when life was normal. Now it sat quiet. My first reaction was caution. A complex that size could hide a lot. Survivors who had turned it into a base. Raiders who liked vantage points and steal. Packs of infected trapped between cars. Animals nesting under platforms. If I drove straight into the main entrance, I might roll up into the middle of someone else's world, and that would be the last choice I ever made. The second reaction came hard on the heels of the first. Height, metal, narrow access points. If the hub was truly empty, or if it only had a small threat inside, I could turn part of it into something far better than a clearing with some stakes and plastic. A workshop on stilts, a crane cab bolted above the tracks, a control tower with one stairwell and a lockable door, places where infected could not easily reach and where large animals had no way to follow at all. I pulled the sedan onto a gravel access road that paralleled the main entrance but did not commit to turning in yet. I parked behind a row of scrub trees where the car did not stand out too much and got out slowly, binoculars in hand. They were not high-end, just a cheap pair from a sporting goods store, but they did the job. I leaned against the hood and scanned the hub piece by piece. On the near side, a chain-link fence surrounded most of the complex, but large sections had collapsed or been cut. The gate hung open at an angle. Grass grew high through the gaps. No fresh tire tracks on the dirt road leading in. No clear paths worn by repeated foot traffic. The trains themselves showed mixed wear. Some boxcars had clean exterior walls with graffiti that looked years old. Others had visible dents and rust streaks. One engine sat near a workshop with panels open, like someone had started repairs and never finished. I focused on the spaces between the cars and buildings. Those were the places someone watching from inside would move through. No obvious figures, no flashes of cloth or metal, no flicker of reflected glass from scopes or binoculars. It did not prove the place was empty. It only told me that if someone was inside, he was not strolling around carelessly in the open. On the far side of the hub, the tree line thickened into another small forest, denser than the valley I had just left. I could see a cut in the foliage that might have been a stream or drainage ditch. The land there dipped slightly. That meant water was likely nearby. Forest plus water plus metal structures overhead. It checked every box my mind had been building since I left the city. I lowered the binoculars and looked at Lily through the windshield. She sat on the passenger seat, watching me with ears pointed forward. She had adapted to the valley, to the road, to hunting her own food when she needed to. If I brought her into that maze of steel and trains, I had to be sure I did not trap her in some corner without a way out. That thought pushed me to be methodical. This could not be another impulsive move like the biker incident. I decided to check the outer edge on foot before bringing the sedan inside. If the fence had a back access point or a weak spot that was not obvious from here, I wanted to find it. The car would stay hidden among the scrub for now. If something went bad, I needed to be able to sprint back and drive. I checked the handgun, adjusted the knife at my belt, and took a deep breath that tasted of dust and metal. Then I started walking toward the old rail repair hub, one step at a time, knowing that whatever I found there next would either give me the first real high ground I had ever had in this new world, or another reason to keep living out of a patched sedan with a cat and a box of mixed regrets. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you. What moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership. Carlos Herrera, Dominique Johnson, The Great Anywho, Jadala, Madam Midnight, Deborah Powell, William Blackwell, TJR. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.